G'day humans! Welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas, and it's an idea, a question that has plagued me ever since the beginning of Donald Trump's political career. What exactly is his theory of the case of international relations? What is his view of diplomacy? How do you reconcile the Trumpian passion for American greatness with his disengagement and withdrawal and disdain for all of the international systems which America itself set up, like free trade deals and security guarantees and so on? This conversation provides me with a better answer than I have ever heard before. It comes from Associate Professor David Smith, who's an expert in American and international politics at the US Studies Centre in Sydney, and he's an Associate Professor at the University of Sydney. But he got his PhD at the University of Michigan, a PhD in political science. And so he appears frequently in Australian press as a sort of a decoder of all things Trump and all things America. And here we really get into the weeds on the theory underpinning Donald Trump's foreign policy. That expands to conversations about tariffs, about the strength of the US dollar, about what bond markets and rising yields on bonds could presage about the fate of the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world and what exactly all that means, whether Ukraine can be resolved by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin alone, and where all of this leaves America in relation to the rest of the world. P.S. What the hell is going on with the Qatari 747 that Donald Trump wants to use as Air Force One? And what does that reveal to us about the great man's mind? I hope you enjoy, as much as I did, this conversation with the one, the only, David Smith. Everyone's sort of spinning around trying to figure out what to make of Trump's first 100 days, and domestic policy. Let's just start with international relations. Have you noticed anything so far in Trump administration Mark II that is notably different or notably revealing about Trump as a president?
There are a few things. One is everything is just very much Trump's foreign policy now. There are really no independent voices in Trump's foreign policy. When you look at the fact that Marco Rubio holds the positions of both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, last person to do that was Henry Kissinger, who was a very powerful and influential voice on Richard Nixon. Most presidencies you look at have these very powerful and influential independent foreign policy figures. So George W. Bush had people like Rumsfeld and Cheney. Bill Clinton had people like Warren Christopher. Barack Obama had Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. Trump, certainly in his first administration, he really did own his own foreign policy, but he still had people around him who were associated with more traditional foreign policy positions. This time around, it really just belongs to him.
I mean, the weird thing is, sorry to jump in, but he does have people who have traditional foreign policy positions.
Absolutely.
He's just chosen the spineless ones.
He totally has.
First time round, they actually had backbone. Marco Rubio does believe all the same things as Hillary Clinton in terms of liberal internationalism and intervention.
Yes.
He just won't stand up for what he believes
anything. No. Yeah. He's Trump was confident in giving him two positions because he knew he wouldn't
Little Marco.
He wouldn't be an independent
Marco
voice.
Won't stand up.
Having said that, Joe Biden was very much the singular voice in his foreign policy as well. I mean, he had experienced foreign policy people like Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, but I can't ever remember anything that they said that was anything other than just being a mouthpiece for Joe Biden. Joe Biden, because of his experiences in the Obama administration, where he kept getting overridden on things like withdrawing from Afghanistan, the lesson he took from that was, I just have to completely own my own foreign policy. And
I mean, I suppose the difference is that he's one of the most experienced and elder statesmen in the world. So, he literally sat down with Golda Meir and, he dined with Churchill and Thomas Jefferson. So it's who would he have around him who is more experienced or knowledgeable about enacting his vision of foreign policy than him? Whereas in the case of Trump, not so much.
Not so much, no. So it is very much solely Trump's foreign policy. That is the way that he likes it. And he's not the sole negotiator because he doesn't want to be. He wants to leave a lot of negotiation to other people. But certainly other countries have been learning very quickly that really the only way to deal with the United States is to appeal directly to Trump, which is another thing that Trump really likes. What else we've discovered about what Trump really likes is announcing deals. He is always prepared to announce a deal before there's any substance of that deal worked out. Now, that is a continuation of his first term as well. The most memorable example of that was when he claimed he had a comprehensive nuclear deal with North Korea, which just turned out to be a half-page memo and apparently a very nice personal letter. We're also seeing the announcement of deal after deal, which in most cases, at least politically, have very little behind them. There have been some big sales deals announced, like the $142 billion weapons deal to Saudi Arabia. That's something. But in terms of actual political agreements, very, very little. And even in terms of trade agreements, we've had announcements of frameworks, but not actually of very much. So what Trump really, really loves is announcing deals. And other countries are aware of that. They have decided, as they did after a while in his first term, that the way to deal with Trump is to come up with things that can be announced. Just as a way of keeping things moving, of getting Trump away from his most intransigent positions like 90% tariffs on things, like that. But when it comes to really difficult conflicts, when it comes to things like Gaza and Ukraine, none of this is amounting to very much at all. Even the minerals deal between Ukraine and the United States involves minerals that may as well be hypothetical because they're inaccessible. A lot of them are in territory that's under Russian control, or it's going to require years, decades of investment before they can actually be extracted.
Right.
So far, we're seeing a lot of announcements of deals without much that is very substantial. And I think that the whole world is kind of in the process of working out exactly where they are with Trump and how to get what they want out of him.
I mean, in real estate, a deal is good when you shake on it and you've got the big, broad outline of the deal. And then you can let the lawyers go off and they can iron out the little details, which are usually subservient to the deal itself.
Yeah.
In politics and foreign policy, often you have to build from the ground up and you can't just make the handshake because actually the devil is in the details. And it really is a sticking point what the right of return of refugees means, for example, or some persnickety little thing that he would probably bore him to tears.
Yeah.
But is actually the fundamental sticking point for the deal to work. The kind interpretation, the Trump supporter would say, well, this is precisely the problem that we can never get anything done because we're so focused on the minutiae of everything.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like, reforming government or anything like that. Yeah. So he's trying to do big things and not be stopped by the process and the roadblocks and the bottlenecks that have accreted in the system that make it impossible to change the status quo.
Yeah.
What do you make of that rationale?
Well, the reality is anything that can be done as quickly as Trump wants to do it can be undone equally quickly. If you want anything that is going to stick, whether it's in international politics or in domestic American politics, it involves long, detailed negotiations. That is just the reality. There are too many people in the world, there are too many powerful players in the world for in any situation, just for a couple of powerful people to be able to get together and sort out the world's problems over a handshake.
Right. So, okay, let's talk about specifics then. A couple of powerful people sorting things out over a handshake sounds remarkably like an allusion to the Ukraine conflict, where Donald Trump felt that he could sideline the Europeans and even sideline the president of Ukraine and just go straight to to the two big superpowers and they can hammer it out as if this was 1962. Where do you see things going? What is your take on the snapshot of the current, where are we?
It's very difficult to say where we are at the moment. I don't believe that Vladimir Putin really has much desire for peace at all. Peace is definitely the second best option for him behind victory, and he clearly still believes that victory is possible, despite the fact that he has been throwing all of the might of the Russian military machine at Ukraine for the last 3 years at a cost of hundreds of thousands of Russian lives for gains that on a map hardly look like anything. I mean, it's not nothing, but it hardly looks like anything. He has sunk so much into this that I think for him, victory is the only thing he really wants to consider at this point. Peace he'll start to consider when he's facing genuine existential threats. As far as Ukraine goes, they are really desperate. I think that Ukrainian people are completely exhausted from the war, but they're not so desperate that they're prepared to surrender at the moment. And even if they lose US support, they're still counting pretty heavily on European support. And European support seems to be getting firmer. We've had the announcement from Germany's Chancellor, Merz, I've forgotten his first name, probably Friedrich or something like that, that they'll raise German military spending to 5% of GDP.
They've said that a lot.
They have said that a lot, but there does seem to be this acceptance among the European powers at the moment that they need to have military capabilities that are not completely dependent on the United States. And given how long Ukraine has managed to hold out with what it has, certainly it's going to be very, very difficult for Russia to get the victory it wants. And so we're still at a point.
And the victory it wants, you mean that's like taking the whole thing? Taking
the whole thing, or at the very least, really reducing Ukraine to a satellite of Russia that never looks towards Europe again. And I think there's just been so much sacrifice on both sides that we're at this stalemate point. Who wants to give up after everything that they have, that both sides have sacrificed? And even without US support, I think there's enough European support that the Ukrainians will keep on going. As much as Trump says Zelensky's got no cards left to play, he's still got that European support, which the resolve seems to have hardened as a result of Trump.
Is that not a testament to Trump's strategy?
Look, you could say it is. I'm not sure if that was actually the outcome that Trump intended, for Europe to become more independent of the US.
I think it was. I mean, he doesn't phrase it like that, but he always says they've been mooching and freeloading for too long.
Does.
They need to pay their own way.
But I think what he wanted was a continuation of the dependence, but with Europe paying the United States a lot more. This, I think, is actually Trump's fundamental vision of the world. It's not American withdrawal. I think it's always been a mistake to call him an isolationist. When he's complaining about other countries freeloading off the US, what he's saying is he wants them to pay the US. As much as people claim that Trump's foreign policy is incoherent and impulsive, there are elements of it that are. Nearly 40 years ago, he published this open letter in the New York Times and a couple of other newspapers saying there's nothing about US foreign policy that a little backbone can't fix. And what he was complaining about then was the US Navy guarding oil shipments from Saudi Arabia to Japan. Saying, why are we doing this? Why is our Navy guarding these ships that aren't ours for oil that isn't ours? But what he says towards the end of the letter is, let's tax these other countries. Let's use our war machines to make money. We could solve our problems, everything from the deficit to homelessness, if other countries were paying for defense. That, I think, is what his basic vision is. The idea that the United States can use its power to tax other countries, it's the same vision behind tariffs, that other countries, in Trump's understanding of them anyway, that other countries are going to be paying. I think he really does, in some ways, see the US as this mighty empire that completely failed to take advantage of its imperial power in the way that previous empires did. It didn't demand tribute from other countries, which is what it should have been doing. And his view is that every problem with the United States can be traced back to the US allowing other countries to take advantage of its imperial altruism rather than the US taking advantage of its own imperial power. I think that's a very misguided view personally, but there is something quite consistent in everything that Trump does. So I actually don't think that Trump wants Europe suddenly taking charge of Ukraine's security, which would ultimately kind of leave the US out in the cold in the process. I think what he would like is for the US to be benefiting a lot more directly, like benefiting financially from its security agreements with the rest of the world, which is why when people ask me, oh, is AUKUS under threat from Trump? I don't think so, because I think AUKUS...
This is the submarine deal that Australia has with the United States and the UK to buy a bunch of nuclear subs.
Yeah, I think AUKUS actually conforms a lot more closely to Trump's idea of what alliances should be.
Right. They pay us money and we give them things.
We supply them
give them security.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. You've done an amazing job of resolving a contradiction that I have been mulling over since throughout this term, which is he talks about American greatness.
Yes.
Make America great again is his slogan. He wants America to be great. And everything that he does globally is accelerating American decline because it's empowering other countries to form alliances with each other that exclude the United States because they realize that the United States is telling them to fuck off.
That's right.
So if someone tells you to fuck off, you go and you make alliances with your other friends, right?
Yes.
I mean, of course you would.
Yeah.
So, NATO will become emboldened in the absence of the United States, whatever that means.
Yes.
Australia looks to alliances with Japan and South Korea and India and whoever else we can muster, and Europe and the UK. And even economically, we'll just be like, okay, well, if there's this erratic tariff regime all of a sudden in the United States and we can't depend on them if they're not bankable, then we'll form our own multilateral alliances, which I'm sure will come about, and trade deals that exclude the United States, all of which just precipitates an era in which the US is no longer indispensable for security, no longer indispensable for economic security. And yet he talks about American greatness. And that contradiction has perplexed me because it seems like I would understand the consistency if he was saying, why do we want to be such a a big, great country standing astride the planet? Why can't we be sort of humble and just do our own thing? Why can't we be Switzerland? But that's interesting that it's not that he doesn't want America to be an empire. It's that he wants it to plunder more. He wants to get the spoils.
Yes.
Like, if you're going to do Iraq, take the fucking oil. If you're going to do Ukraine, take the gems.
That's what he said. He wants to renegotiate the terms of the contract.
Yeah.
He wants to raise the rent. is the basic way of looking at it.
So what is, just to play devil's advocate, what is wrong with that? I mean, there is a well-understood phenomenon in Europe that they basically have had their healthcare subsidized by the United States because they didn't have to spend money on bombs. So they've had the luxury of having great welfare states because they had much lower defense budgets. If they had to spend what America had been spending on defense during the Cold War, they wouldn't have been able to have such lavish social welfare nets. Was that fair? And if not, then what do you do about it now?
I think we have to remember that the US constructed this order for its benefit. Like, yes, it benefited other countries as well. Yes, it allowed the rise of the European welfare state, but it was also immensely beneficial to the United States because the US had all of these countries around the world who, in political terms, were prepared to do basically whatever the United States wanted. And that was a massive source of American power in the world because getting countries to do things because they believe in your legitimate authority as the leader of the free world, that's a lot cheaper than coercion. I think one of the mistakes that Trump is making is believing that coercion and threats are somehow cheaper than the alliance system. They're not. The alliance system was the cheapest form of American domination that the United States is ever going to have. Threats are expensive.
How
are threats expensive?
Yeah, and how are alliances cheaper than threats?
Yeah, so when you make the threat of a tariff, like a 90% tariff, and then you back off it in return for some sort of fairly trivial deal, then what you've shown is this is what I will actually accept instead of a tariff. It means that you can't use that threat again very credibly. Okay, so when, for example, the first time Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Canada and then backed off when Canada created the post of fentanyl czar in its government, that then completely weakened the tariff threat. So, Trump had to threaten a trade war in order to get one meaningless government post created. That's what coercion actually costs when you're trying to use it on an ally. Now Trump is in an incredibly expensive trade war with Canada, and because he spent months pissing Canadians off by talking about the 51st state and Governor Trudeau, Canadians are much more prepared to fight that trade war than Americans are. Okay?
Right.
So
the cost, Trump would say, yes, of course, there's a short-term economic cost to rebalancing things. You got to take your medicine and your medicine doesn't taste good. But in the long run, you have to fix the problem. And if the problem is that there's an imbalance of power and that everybody just assumes that American largesse will be showered upon them with nothing expected from them in return, you have to shock the system a bit, make a bold threat, then retreat from the threat, and see what you have gotten, see what your subjects have been able to deliver unto you. And at least yes, there's a short-term cost, but there's a longer-term gain in not looking like a chump.
So maybe if he did that in a more strategic and consistent way, rather than this one day it's threatening the worst trade war in history, and then the next day pretending it didn't happen, then that strategy would probably make a bit more sense. This is like a lot of things with Trump. Tariffs, in order to bring the manufacturing industry back, there are specific ways of doing that. You target them in particular ways. You give everybody a lot of advance notice that you're doing them, and you stick to it. And you accept rising prices because the whole idea is for prices to rise on foreign goods in order to change people's consumer behavior. Trump just doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in that level of strategy.
Right.
He's
doing several things. With the tariffs, he's doing several things at once, isn't he? He's
trying to do several things at once.
He seems to actually believe in tariffs and actually want them in order to fund a resurgence in American manufacturing. Which many economists say, if you want to be able to manufacture your own stuff in a particular industry, just subsidize it if you want to. Like it's cleaner just to pay money to the industry to make it rather than to tax what's coming in. But then he's also doing he's a businessman. He's a wheeler and dealer, right? He likes making deals. So he likes the game. Yeah, likes announcing deals and he likes... Well, in the case of tariffs, they are actual deals in the sense that it's an agreement with a country for them to give him something in order for him to remove the threat of the tariff. It's a pretty rudimentary deal, but it's, I threaten you with this, you give me that, and it's a haggle. It's a little haggle. And he can't resist himself from haggling, but the haggling undermines the credibility of the tariff as a tool of rebuilding American manufacturing because, as you say, there's no consistency. There's nobody believes that he's going to stick by it for long enough for them to bother investing in a factory in Arkansas that's not going to open until 2028.
And then he claims that the tariffs are going to raise enormous amounts of revenue as well. Now, if the tariffs were serving their purpose of reviving the manufacturing industry, they wouldn't be raising a lot of revenue because people wouldn't be buying...
They'd be buying American.
That many foreign goods. So there's a lot of contradictory things going on there. The other thing is, and I think this gets to a few of the questions that you've been asking, the elephant in the room is the very strong United States dollar. It's really, the US dollar is part of what's behind all of the subsidies of the US to the rest of the world. This is one of the things that makes it possible. But it's also one of the reasons why there is such a massive imbalance in trade. It's because of the strength of the US dollar, which has been driven by the fact that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It's traditionally the safest thing for the safest currency for foreign investors to
just pause. Sorry, about how it creates trade imbalances, because I always have to think this through logically in a clean series of steps. How does a strong dollar weakens exports?
Yes, it does, because it makes American goods
imports cheaper for Americans.
Yes, it makes American goods more expensive for foreigners, and it makes foreign goods cheaper for Americans. So this is one of the big things that leads to the imbalance of
so
trade.
If I'm in the States and I'm shopping at Walmart and I'm comparing an American-made good from a foreign-made good, the delta between the two is exacerbated by the fact that my buying power and the buying power of all the people who made the American thing is so much stronger than the buying power of the people who made the Chinese thing because they live on a much lower wage. I mean, set aside the economic differences, but even just in terms of the exchange rate. And conversely, if I'm in France and I'm looking at something, maybe let's not take the euro, but a non-eurozone country. I'm in Norway. And I'm in my store and I'm looking at American produce versus Norwegian produce. The American one is artificially expensive because the dollar is so strong in the exchange rate.
So this massively strong dollar is the single biggest economic benefit that basically the US gives to the rest of the world. And But the effect is the imbalance of trade. One of the most thoughtful economists who proposes protectionist policies is a guy called Michael Pettis, who was an advisor both to the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. So he's for people who want to take a more protectionist angle. He is one of the well-respected figures that they turn to. Actually, teaches economics in China. And he wrote a really interesting foreign affairs article in the lead up to the Trump administration saying tariffs would actually be appropriate now because unlike when the disastrous tariffs were put in place in the 1930s, back then the US produced a lot more than it consumed. So the US was really shooting itself in the foot with tariffs. So now the US consumes far more than it produces, and tariffs would be a way of rebalancing that. But tariffs are, for Pettis, they're a secondary thing. The big thing he believes that has to be tackled is the strength of the United States dollar. As long as the US dollar is that strong, as long as other countries are buying so many of them, this trade imbalance is going to persist forever. Now, what's Trump's position on the US dollar? He loves the strong US dollar. He just sees that as the most important symbol of global power. When there was some ridiculous pie-in-the-sky proposal to create a BRICS currency, which could be a rival to the world's reserve currency. Now,
BRICS being Brazil, Russia,
India, China, and South Africa.
The developing
Now,
leaders.
Try to imagine those countries really doing anything like that together, creating an alternative, India and China in an alternative currency together, right? Complete pipe dream. But Trump was so incensed when he heard about this that he truthed out, if you threaten the almighty US dollar, I will put a 200% tariff on you. Right. So he is very, very protective.
G'day, humans. Well, if you've listened to this much of the episode, then you must enjoy it, presumably, unless you're just listening for masochistic reasons. So you should listen to the rest of it. And the way you do that is by subscribing to the premium feed, where you not only get to hear the rest of this delightful conversation, and trust me, it gets better than what you just heard, but you also get to hear no ads, 0 ads. And previously, up until now, you had to go to the old Substack to do that and follow me on Substack and add one more platform to your life if you're not already on Substack. But here's the thing. We are now on Apple Premium Podcast as well. So with one click, Apple will just subscribe you up to the premium feed. You'll be able to listen to the rest of this conversation right now. So open up your Apple Podcasts, click the old Pay Old Zepsy button. That's probably what it's called, Pay Old Zepsy. And you click the button, and then you no longer have to be a free rider. You can feel like you're contributing to the mission of this show, which is really what we're all here for. Better conversations, a freer, more freewheeling attitude towards the things that we can talk about, a way to steel-man our opponents and to take the most gracious approach towards disagreement. That is what you're voting for when you vote for Uncomfortable Conversations by going into your Apple Podcasts and clicking subscribe. I love you. If you don't do that, that's fine. I'll see you the next free episode, I guess. Take care.